Xbox may have found a second use for layoffs, cutting costs while quietly removing workers who became inconvenient to management. A former employee claims an executive under investigation later held influence when witnesses appeared on a layoff list. None of this proves retaliation, but it is exactly the kind of sequence this story needs to examine. According to game developer, 4 former Xbox workers described experiences that created the same basic fear. Complaints, investigations, accommodation requests, and challenges to alleged misconduct may have changed how management treated them. Today, we are breaking down the 4 accounts, Microsoft's response, what the evidence supports, and what it still cannot prove. Fundamentally, the question is not whether Xbox had business reasons to cut jobs. Instead, the question is whether some managers may have used those cuts to remove specific critics. Disturbingly, the first account begins with an investigation, because reporting a manager should bring protection, not danger. First, an anonymous former employee said they acted as a witness during an investigation involving an executive accused of berating workers. During that process, the executive allegedly tried to identify who had spoken to investigators. Later, according to the witness, that same executive held influence when leaders helped decide who would be included in layoffs. However, imagine cooperating with investigators before learning the person under scrutiny may influence whether your job survives. Suddenly, a business decision stops looking purely financial and begins looking personally dangerous. Witness protection means very little when the accused may still influence future employment decisions. Second, another former worker described a supervisor who allegedly abused employees verbally. After the worker challenged that supervisor, management reportedly placed them on a performance improvement plan for disrespecting leadership. Beautifully, the paperwork machine discovered a performance emergency the moment an employee answered back. Management could allegedly mistreat workers, yet resistance from below became the documented problem. Reportedly, access to Microsoft systems was then restricted, leaving the employee to accept the plan or leave. Subsequently, the worker says complaints about the supervisor went through human resources but produced no meaningful protection. Fair employers use performance plans to correct genuine problems and help workers improve. Abusive employers can use the same process to make a planned removal look routine. Distinguishing those two uses matters because the same paperwork can represent either genuine correction or prepared cover. Potential misuse explains why employees can fear the very reporting systems designed to protect them. Third, a veteran former Xbox employee described what they believed was retaliation inside a subsidiary. More seriously, that source said leadership punished another worker after she requested disability accommodations. Jokes should stop here because retaliation involving disability rights is not amusing office gossip. Corporate campaigns promote accessibility, adaptive technology, and gaming for disabled players. Meanwhile, a former worker alleges that accessibility inside one workplace received a very different response. Still, the contradiction demands a direct answer. Accessibility cannot become a celebrated principle for customers and an inconvenience when an employee needs practical support. Otherwise, inclusion becomes public branding while workers receive private resistance. Pause here because the pattern being alleged is now clear. So far, one worker assists an investigation, another challenges a supervisor, and a third witnesses conflict after a disability accommodation request. Different circumstances produce the same fear. Speaking up may have changed how management viewed the employee afterward. This matters beyond Xbox because workers report problems through the same company controlling their reviews, promotions, assignments, and layoffs. Employees are told to trust the process while knowing the process ultimately reports to the employer. Sometimes that structure protects everyone fairly. Other times, the person raising a warning may begin looking like another risk management once contained. Anonymous accounts establish the alleged pattern, but Glenn Israel adds a public name, a leadership record, an award, a redundancy decision, and a replacement timeline. Next comes the strongest named case. Israel says one 9-month period required him to cover 3 director-level positions across 3 projects. Recognition followed through a special service award, suggesting Xbox viewed his contribution as unusually valuable. Following Israel's complaints involving senior Halo Studios leaders, his art director position was declared unnecessary during late 2025. Roughly 1 month after his departure, another employee was promoted into an art director role at the same studio. Conveniently, the position appears to have remained unnecessary for about the length of a free Game Pass trial. Chronology strongly supports Israel's suspicion, but timing alone cannot prove retaliation. Business needs change, projects move, and 2 jobs sharing a title may involve different duties, budgets, or reporting lines. Yet Microsoft could reduce suspicion by explaining the selection standards, showing consistent application, or supporting an outside review. What remains is his award beside the later claim that his role was unnecessary. Earlier reporting covered Israel's allegations involving harassment, favoritism, compensation, blacklisting, and retaliation. Previously, an Xbox spokesperson said the company takes claims from current and former employees seriously while declining to discuss individual personnel matters. Notably, that statement came from earlier reporting about Israel, not from a direct response addressing all 4 accounts. Game developer contacted Xbox before publishing the newer report on June 24, but said the company had not responded by publication. Therefore, viewers should not mistake an older statement for a detailed answer to this newer report. Legally, employers cannot dump private personnel files merely to win an argument. Practically, the earlier statement says little about investigations, witness protection, or layoff selection. Reaching human resources brings us to several sources who say Microsoft's internal reporting system offered little protection. Traditionally, workers expect HR to address misconduct and prevent punishment for reporting it. Realistically, HR works for the company, where mistreatment also creates legal and financial risk. Often those interests align. Elsewhere, the reporting employee may start looking like a risk management once contained. Hence the cynical question, are workers reporting a problem, or accidentally helping the company prepare its next risk assessment? Online reactions focused on this fear because many workers already distrust internal investigations. Reddit anger proves nothing and cannot replace records, testimony, or review. Actual proof would connect complaints to decisions and expose false, selective, or inconsistent business reasons. Together, 4 separate workplace complaints become one much larger corporate problem. Mass layoffs make proof especially difficult because they create perfect corporate fog around individual choices. Ordinary firings invite specific questions: why this worker, why this date, and what happened after the complaint. Large reductions offer a cleaner script about restructuring, redundancy, priorities, market pressure, efficiency, and difficult choices. Amid hundreds of departures, one suspicious case disappears, while every question receives the same explanation. Former workers allege that legitimate cost-cutting can therefore hide personal retaliation, because both outcomes look identical from outside. Now, what would investigators actually need to establish retaliation? They would look for proof that decision-makers knew about complaints before scoring workers for removal. Investigators would compare treatment among employees with similar performance, roles, or project needs. Changed reviews appearing after complaints would matter, especially if earlier records showed strong work. Ignored layoff rules, unusual exceptions, private messages, or rushed performance warnings could also weaken the company's explanation. Replacing a supposedly unnecessary position soon afterward would matter alongside other inconsistencies. One suspicious date proves little. Several conflicting decisions supported by records would be harder to dismiss as coincidence. Clear records would show who set the criteria, when they were set, who changed them, and whether complaints affected scores. That is the difference between suspicious timing and a provable case. The company's stated reason stops matching its actual decisions. 4 practical questions would decide whether the process deserves trust. Were managers accused in complaints allowed to score the same employees who reported them? Did performance ratings change only after those complaints entered the system? Was the redundancy formula locked before individual names were discussed, or adjusted once leaders saw who might be removed? Finally, were comparable workers retained under exceptions that were never offered to the people who spoke up? Honest answers would not automatically prove retaliation, but evasive answers would make the company's neutral business explanation much harder to accept under any serious independent examination of events. Independent review would not require Microsoft to publish private medical records, salaries, or every personnel dispute. Qualified reviewers could privately compare complaint dates, performance changes, selection rules, and conflicts involving managers who scored employees for removal. Confidential conclusions would offer more confidence than asking the same internal system accused of failing workers to certify its own fairness. Individually, every account has an alternative explanation. Collectively, they raise a larger question: can challenged managers still influence reviews, assignments, or layoffs fairly? Rather than claiming every departure was revenge, the report points toward a process vulnerable to abuse. Managers would not need written orders if flexible scoring and a crowded list achieved the same result quietly. Of course, companies need clear standards created before complaints and names enter the discussion. Defenders could argue that different projects, skills, or budget decisions, not complaints, determine the cuts. Such an explanation may be legitimate, but only consistent records and selection standards can test it. Employment attorney Thomas Lenz told Game Developer that companies should use even-handed criteria capable of surviving outside scrutiny. He also advised workers to preserve proof of mistreatment, achievements, communications, reviews, and selection decisions. Think about how broken that advice sounds for someone who merely wants to report a supervisor. Consequently, employees are warned to build a private legal archive before speaking through official channels. Emails become insurance, awards become exhibits, and ordinary meetings become dates on a future timeline. 3 sources remain anonymous, protecting them from career damage while limiting independent examination. Furthermore, viewers have not seen complete complaints, investigation files, performance plans, messages, criteria, or separation documents. Testimony can expose misconduct, yet responsible coverage must state what cannot be checked. Likewise, Microsoft's refusal to discuss individual cases is understandable, but it leaves the central accusations unanswered. Balance does not mean pretending every explanation is equally likely. Properly, balance means separating reported testimony, confirmed sequence, reasonable inference, and proven fact. Viewers deserve that distinction because careless certainty lets Microsoft dismiss serious questions as console war bait. Ultimately, did Xbox use layoffs to punish critics? Public evidence cannot prove that. Reporting does show 4 former employees describing suspicious timing, failed internal protections, and career damage after workplace conflict. Microsoft could support an outside review, preserve records, protect witnesses, and explain how redundancy decisions were scored under clear standards applied company-wide. Until that happens, viewers should treat retaliation as a serious allegation supported by troubling patterns, not a proven fact. Will the company open the process to credible examination, or issue another statement saying every claim matters while explaining absolutely nothing? At Xbox, speaking up allegedly did not earn some workers a meeting. It may have earned them a place on the next restructuring spreadsheet.